The entire pack falls silent as the mute Omega stands before them. The Alpha commands her to speak her vows, but she has no voice. Her hands tremble. Then she begins to hum. The melody rises through the sacred grove, and warriors weep. How did a voiceless Omega become their future queen? Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. The winter storm had been howling around Iris's cabin for 3 days, and she was beginning to wonder if it would ever end. Snow piled against the walls, higher than her windows. Wind screamed through the trees with a voice that sounded almost alive, and the world beyond her small windows was nothing but white chaos. She had enough food and firewood to last another week, maybe 2 if she was careful. But the isolation was starting to press against her mind like a physical weight. Not that Iris minded being alone. She had always been alone. Even when she lived in the pack territory, surrounded by other shifters who could speak and laugh and communicate in ways that came so easily to them. Being mute in a world that valued verbal communication above all else had made her an outsider from birth, someone the other Omegas whispered about and the Alphas dismissed as damaged goods. She had learned sign language as a child, but most pack members couldn't be bothered to learn it back, leaving her isolated even in a crowd. When she turned 18 and received her small inheritance from her late parents, who had died in a rogue attack when she was 15, she had used it to buy this cabin at the edge of the territory, far from judgmental eyes and pitying looks, far from the pack gatherings where she sat silent and ignored, far from the mating ceremonies where alphas chose their partners and she was never once considered. Here, in her solitude, Iris had found a kind of peace. She tended her garden in summer, preserved food for winter, created beautiful tapestries on her loom that she sold in the nearby human village. She communicated through writing when necessary, through gestures and expressions when writing wasn't practical. And when words failed entirely, when the loneliness became too much to bear, she hummed. It was the only sound she could make, a soft vibration that emerged from her throat without the need for speech. Her humming had always been her comfort, her companion, the one way she could create music in a silent existence. She hummed while she worked, while she cooked, while she sat by the fire on cold winter nights. It wasn't much, but it was hers. On the 4th night of the storm, something scratched at her door. Iris looked up from the tapestry she was working on, her hand stilling on the loom. The scratching came again, weak and desperate, accompanied by a sound that made her heart clench with sympathy. A whimper, high and pained, barely audible over the howling wind. An animal was at her door, injured and seeking shelter from the storm. Every instinct told her to stay inside, to ignore the scratching and hope whatever creature it was moved on. Winter in the mountains was harsh, and predators grew desperate when food was scarce. Opening her door could mean inviting death inside, but that whimper, that desperate, agonized sound. Iris set aside her weaving and crossed to the door, her hand hesitating on the latch. She grabbed the iron poker from beside the fireplace, holding it ready as she slowly pulled the door open. A wolf collapsed across her threshold, its massive body barely fitting through the doorway. Iris jumped back, raising the poker, her heart hammering in her chest. But the wolf didn't attack. It didn't even move. It simply lay there in the snow, its gray fur matted with blood, its amber eyes glazed with pain and exhaustion. Iris had seen wolves before. The pack territory was full of them, shifters who could take animal form at will. But this wolf was different. It was larger than any she had encountered, with fur so dark it was almost black in places. And those amber eyes held an intelligence that went beyond even shifter awareness. And it was dying. She could see that clearly in the labored rise and fall of its chest, the way blood pooled beneath its body, the trembling that shook its entire frame. Iris made a decision. She set down the poker, grabbed the wolf by its scruff, and used all her strength to drag it inside. It was incredibly heavy, dead weight, that her omega frame struggled to move, but fear and determination gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. She managed to pull it far enough inside to close the door against the storm, then collapsed beside it, breathing hard. The wolf's eyes found hers, and something passed between them. Gratitude, perhaps, or recognition? Then its eyes closed, and Iris was left alone with a dying wolf and no idea what to do. She examined the wounds as best she could, carefully parting the matted fur to reveal deep gashes along the wolf's side and shoulder. Claw marks, she realized with growing dread. This wolf had been in a fight, and from the severity of the injuries, it had lost. The wounds were too deep for her limited medical knowledge, too severe for the simple herbs and bandages she kept in her cabin. But she had to try. She couldn't drag this magnificent creature inside just to watch it die on her floor. Iris worked through the night, cleaning the wounds with warm water and the antiseptic herbs her mother had taught her to use years ago. Each wound required careful attention, gentle pressure to clean away the dirt and blood without causing more damage. She packed the worst of the gashes with poultices made from yarrow and comfrey, plants she had harvested and dried last summer specifically for their healing properties. The yarrow would help stop the bleeding, while the comfrey would promote tissue repair. She wrapped them in clean cloth torn from her spare linens, binding each bandage securely, but not so tight that it would restrict movement. She covered the wolf with every blanket she owned, layering them carefully to trap heat and help fight off shock. The wolf's body temperature was dangerously low, its breathing shallow and irregular. She stoked the fire higher, sacrificing precious firewood to create warmth that might make the difference between life and death. And she hummed. It started without conscious thought, a low vibration in her throat that emerged as she worked, as natural as breathing. A wordless melody that her mother used to hum when Iris was sick, sitting by her bedside through feverish nights, the soft sound a constant reassurance that she wasn't alone. It was a lullaby, without lyrics that spoke of comfort and safety, and the promise that everything would be all right, that pain was temporary, that healing would come with patience and care. The wolf's breathing steadied as she hummed. Its trembling eased. Those amber eyes opened occasionally, finding her in the firelight, watching her with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. Hours passed. Iris hummed and worked, changed bandages when they soaked through with blood, kept the fire burning high to ward off the cold. Her throat grew tired, her voice becoming raspy, but she didn't stop. The humming seemed to be the only thing keeping the wolf tethered to life, the only anchor in a sea of pain. Stay with me, she thought, knowing the wolf couldn't hear her unspoken words, but willing them anyway. Don't give up. You're strong. You can survive this. Dawn came slowly, the storm finally beginning to ease. Weak sunlight filtered through Iris's windows, illuminating the scene. A small omega woman curled beside an enormous wolf, both of them exhausted, her hand resting on its head as she hummed the same melody she had been humming all night. The wolf's chest rose and fell with steady breaths. The bleeding had stopped. Against all odds, it had survived the night. Iris allowed herself a moment of relief, her humming fading to silence as exhaustion finally claimed her. She closed her eyes, her hand still on the wolf's head, and drifted into sleep. She woke to silence. Not the comfortable silence of her solitude, but a heavy, expectant quiet that raised every hair on the back of her neck. The fire had burned down to embers, and pale morning light filled the cabin, and the wolf was gone. Iris sat up quickly, looking around in confusion, The blankets were pushed aside, the bandages she had so carefully wrapped were scattered across the floor, and the door stood slightly ajar, cold air streaming inside. Had the wolf recovered enough to leave, or had someone come and taken it while she slept? She stood on shaky legs and walked to the door, pulling it open fully to look outside. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Wolves, dozens of them, surrounding her cabin in a perfect circle. She counted quickly, her heart racing. 30. Exactly 30. Wolves stood in her yard, their eyes all fixed on her door, their postures alert but not aggressive. They were waiting. Iris's mind raced. This had to be a pack. Shifters, not wild animals, organized in a way that no ordinary wolves could manage. But why were they here? Had they come for the wounded wolf? Were they angry that she had interfered? She stood frozen in the doorway, unsure whether to retreat inside or stand her ground. The wolves simply watched, not moving, not making a sound. It was eerie, this silence, this stillness. Then the circle parted, and a man walked through. He was tall and powerfully built, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders, and eyes the same amber color as the wolf she had tended through the night. He wore simple clothes, despite the cold, his feet bare in the snow, and he moved with a predator's grace that marked him as alpha, even before she saw the authority in his bearing. "You," he said, and his voice was deep and resonant, carrying easily across the snow-covered yard. "You are the one who saved him." Iris nodded, not trusting herself to respond in any other way. She had no voice to answer with, no words to explain. She could only stand there and hope her acknowledgement was enough. The man studied her for a long moment, his amber eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. Iris fought the urge to fidget, to shrink back from that intense scrutiny. She had grown accustomed to people looking at her with dismissal or pity. This man looked at her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. "My son," the man said finally, "was attacked 3 days ago by rogues who challenged his position as heir to our pack. They left him for dead in the storm. We have been searching for him, following his trail, fearing we would find only his body." His son. The wounded wolf was this man's son. Instead, we find him alive, healed, sleeping peacefully in your cabin. His wounds are bandaged, his fever broken, his breathing steady. The man took a step closer, and Iris fought the urge to retreat. "The healers in my pack could not have done better, and you are just an omega, living alone with no formal training." There was a question in his words, an unspoken demand for explanation. Iris gestured helplessly at the cabin, at herself, trying to communicate that she had only done what anyone would do. But the man was still waiting, clearly expecting more. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small notebook and pencil she always carried, the tools she used to communicate with the rare visitors to her isolated home. With trembling hands she wrote, "I only did what I could. The herbs, the bandages, I couldn't let him die." The man read her words, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at her again, and something in his gaze had shifted. "You are mute." It wasn't a question, but Iris nodded anyway. She had learned long ago that acknowledging her condition up front saved confusion later. "And yet, my son tells me you hummed to him all night, that your voice, such as it is, kept him tethered to life when he wanted to let go, that your melody gave him something to hold on to in the darkness." Iris's eyes widened. The wolf had been conscious, had understood her humming. She had thought he was too far gone, too lost in pain to be aware of anything. "I am Cassius Darkwood, Alpha of the Northern Ridge Pack," the man continued, "and the wolf you saved is my son, Kieran. He is my heir, my only child, and the future of my pack. By saving his life, you have earned a debt that can never be fully repaid." Iris shook her head, writing quickly, "No debt. I was glad to help. Please, and tell him I'm happy he survived." Cassius read her words, and something that might have been respect flickered in his amber eyes. "You ask for nothing in return. No reward, no recognition, no favor. You simply helped because you could." She nodded. What else would she do? Leave a dying creature on her doorstep? "That makes you either incredibly foolish or incredibly brave. I haven't decided which." Cassius turned and gestured to someone in the circle of wolves. "Bring him." Two of the wolves shifted, their forms blurring and reforming into human shapes. They were both young men, strong and capable looking, and they moved with the synchronized efficiency of trained guards. They returned to the circle and helped someone stand, supporting him between them as they guided him toward the cabin. It was the wounded wolf, now in human form. He was younger than Iris had expected, perhaps mid-20s, with the same dark hair as his father, and those striking amber eyes. He was shirtless despite the cold, his torso wrapped in the bandages she had applied, and he moved with obvious pain but also with determination. "This is Kieran," Cassius said. "My son, the wolf you saved." Kieran pulled away from his supporters and walked the last few steps on his own, stopping just short of where Iris stood in the doorway. Up close, she could see that he was beautiful, in the way that alphas often were, all sharp features and raw power. But there was something else in his face, something softer that his father didn't have. Gratitude, perhaps, or wonder. "You hummed me," he said, and his voice was gentler than his father's, younger and less certain. "All night, you sat beside me and hummed. I heard you even when the pain was trying to drag me under. Your voice became my lifeline." Iris felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. She hadn't realized he was aware, hadn't known her humming had made any difference. She reached for her notebook, but Kieran shook his head. "You don't need to write. I can see your answers in your face." He smiled, and the expression transformed him from intimidating to almost boyish. "Thank you. For saving me? For staying with me? For giving me something to hold on to when I wanted to let go." Iris's throat tightened with emotion. She wanted to tell him he was welcome, that she was just glad he had survived, that his gratitude meant more than he could know. But she had no voice for those words, no way to express the feelings rising in her chest, so she did the only thing she could. She hummed. It was just a few notes, a brief melody that carried no words but conveyed everything she felt: relief and joy and hope and connection, a musical expression of all the things she couldn't say. Kieran's eyes widened, and something crossed his face that Iris couldn't identify. His father's expression shifted too, becoming thoughtful in a way that made Iris nervous. "Remarkable," Cassius murmured. "Absolutely remarkable." "Father," Kieran said, not taking his eyes off Iris, "I would like to speak with her. Alone." Cassius studied his son for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well, but don't overexert yourself. Your wounds are still healing." The alpha turned and gestured to his wolves, and the entire pack began to move, flowing around the cabin and back into the forest like a receding tide. Within moments, only Iris and Kieran remained, standing in the cold morning air, the silence between them heavy with unspoken things. "May I come inside?" Kieran asked. "I promise I won't hurt you. I just want to talk." Iris hesitated, then nodded and stepped back to allow him entry. He moved past her carefully, his body still weak from his injuries, and settled onto the bench beside her fireplace with obvious relief. Iris closed the door against the cold and busied herself building up the fire, giving herself time to think. Having him here, in human form, was different from tending a wounded wolf. He was aware now, cognizant, able to judge and question, and he was an alpha heir, someone far above her station, someone who had no business being in her humble cabin. You live here alone, Kieran said, looking around at her small space. It wasn't really a question, but Iris nodded anyway. By choice? She retrieved her notebook and wrote, Yes, I wanted peace. Quiet. Because you're mute. Again, not really a question. The pack didn't accept you. How did he know? Iris wrote, I was born this way. The other Omegas didn't understand. The Alphas didn't want a defective mate. She immediately regretted writing that last part. The bitterness she usually kept hidden bleeding through in her words. But Kieran just looked sad, not pitying, which was somehow worse. Their loss, he said simply. You are clearly capable, intelligent, and compassionate. Anyone who dismisses you because of your voice is a fool. Iris felt tears prick at her eyes. No one had ever said anything like that to her. No one had ever looked past her disability to see who she was beneath it. She wrote, Why did you want to talk to me? Kieran was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his words carefully. Because when I was lying in the snow, bleeding and broken, ready to give up and let the cold take me, I heard your humming. It was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard, and it gave me a reason to keep fighting. Iris's hand trembled as she wrote, It's just humming. Nothing special. It's not just humming, not to me. Kieran leaned forward, wincing slightly at the pain the movement caused. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you react. Iris nodded, clutching her pencil tightly. In our world, in shifter culture, we have something called a mate bond. It's a connection that forms between two people who are meant to be together. When you meet your mate, something clicks into place. Something that's been missing your whole life suddenly makes sense. Iris's heart began to pound. She had heard of mate bonds, of course. Every shifter knew about them, dreamed about them, hoped to find theirs someday. But she had long ago accepted that no Alpha would ever want her as a mate, that she would spend her life alone. When I woke this morning, Kieran continued, his amber eyes holding hers with an intensity that made it hard to breathe, I was in human form. The wounds you had bandaged in my wolf form transferred to my human body. I was weak and disoriented, but I was alive. And the first thought I had, the first feeling that rushed through me, was that I needed to find you, to see you, to thank the person who had saved my life. He paused, taking a deep breath. But it was more than gratitude. It was recognition, a bone-deep certainty that I was looking at the person I had been searching for my entire life. My mate. Iris dropped her pencil. It clattered to the floor, but she didn't pick it up. She could only stare at Kieran, at this alpha heir who was claiming she was his mate, certain he must be joking or confused or still affected by his injuries. I know it's sudden, Kieran said quickly. I know you don't know me, have no reason to believe me. But I'm telling you the truth. You are my mate, Iris, and if you'll have me, I would very much like to get to know you properly. Iris grabbed for her notebook with shaking hands and wrote, This isn't funny. I'm not joking. I would never joke about something like this. Then you're confused, the wounds, the trauma. You're not thinking clearly. I've never thought more clearly in my life. Kieran's voice was earnest, pleading. Please, just consider it. Spend some time with me. Let me prove that this is real. Why would you want me? Iris wrote, and the words were angry, defensive, all the hurt and rejection she had been hiding for years coming out in harsh strokes. I'm mute. I'm an Omega. I'm nobody. You're an Alpha heir. You could have anyone. Why would you choose someone broken? You're not broken, Kieran said fiercely. You're different, yes, but different doesn't mean less. You saved my life with nothing but herbs and compassion and a voice that doesn't speak but sings anyway. You live independently, provide for yourself, create beauty with your hands. He gestured at the half-finished tapestry on her loom. You are remarkable, Iris, And I would be honored if you would give me a chance to prove that I see you for who you really are." Iris stared at him, wanting desperately to believe, but afraid of the hope that was trying to bloom in her chest. What if this was real? What if he truly meant it? What if she could have the thing she had stopped allowing herself to dream about? But what if he was wrong? What if the bond he felt was just gratitude or confusion? What if she opened her heart only to have it shattered when he realized his mistake? She wrote, "I need time to think." "Of course. Take all the time you need." Kieran stood, moving carefully. "I should return to the Pack territory anyway. Let my father's healers check my wounds, rest properly, build up my strength." He moved toward the door, then paused and turned back to her. "I'll come back, if you'll allow it. Visit you, talk with you, let you get to know me. No pressure, no expectations, just two people spending time together and seeing what develops." Iris nodded slowly, not trusting herself to write anything else. Kieran smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Thank you, Iris, for everything. I'll see you soon." He left, closing the door gently behind him, and Iris was alone once again in her cabin. But the silence felt different now, charged with possibility, humming with potential she hadn't felt in years. She picked up her pencil from where she had dropped it and stared at the notebook in her lap. Then, slowly, carefully, she wrote a single word. Maybe. The days that followed were strange and unsettling. Iris tried to return to her normal routine, working on her tapestries, tending her winter stores, going about the business of survival. But her mind kept returning to Kieran, to his words, to the impossible claim that she was his mate. She told herself not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment. Better to assume he would forget about her, that his gratitude would fade with his wounds, that he would realize his mistake and move on with his life. But 3 days after the encounter, he returned. Iris heard the knock and opened the door to find Kieran standing on her porch, looking healthier than he had the last time she'd seen him. His wounds were healing rapidly, the bandages gone, only faint pink lines visible on his torso beneath his shirt. "Hello," he said, and his smile was tentative, hopeful. "I was hoping you might have time to talk." Iris stepped aside to let him in, her heart racing. He had come back. He had actually come back. They spent the afternoon together, Kieran talking and Iris writing responses in her notebook. He told her about his life, about growing up as the alpha heir, about the pressure and responsibility that came with his position. He talked about his mother, who had died when he was young, and his father, who had raised him alone and taught him everything about leadership and honor and duty. And he asked her questions about her childhood, her parents, her weaving, her life in solitude. He listened to every answer, read every word she wrote with genuine interest, never once making her feel like her method of communication was inferior or frustrating. When the sun began to set and Kieran reluctantly said he needed to return to the pack, Iris found herself disappointed. The afternoon had passed quickly, filled with the kind of easy conversation she hadn't experienced since her parents died. He made her laugh, made her think, made her feel seen in a way that had nothing to do with pity and everything to do with respect. "May I come back tomorrow?" he asked at the door. Iris nodded, then on impulse, she hummed. Just a few notes, a melody that conveyed yes and please and I'd like that. Kieran's face lit up. "I love hearing you hum. Don't ever stop." He came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. A pattern developed, Kieran arriving in the morning and staying until evening, the two of them talking and laughing, and slowly building something that felt like friendship, but had the potential to become so much more. Iris found herself opening up in ways she never had before, sharing fears and dreams and hopes she had kept locked inside for years. Kieran was patient with her writing, never rushing her, always giving her time to express herself fully, and when she hummed, which she did more and more frequently in his presence, he would stop whatever he was doing and just listen, his eyes soft and his expression tender. On the 7th day of his visits, Iris finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind since their first conversation. She wrote, "Why me? Really? You could have any Omega in the pack, beautiful ones who can speak, who know how to be a proper alpha's mate. Why choose someone like me?" Kieran read her words and was quiet for a long moment. Then he took her hand, the first time he had touched her since he arrived, and his grip was warm and strong and gentle. "I'll tell you a story," he said. "When I was a boy, maybe 7 or 8, my mother took me to the human market in the village near our territory. She wanted to buy fabric for new curtains, something trivial like that. But while she was talking to the merchant, I wandered off and found a street performer." He smiled at the memory. She was an old woman, blind and poor, sitting on a corner with a tin cup, and she was singing. Not words, just sounds, humming the most beautiful melody I had ever heard. I stood there for an hour, just listening, completely mesmerized. When my mother finally found me, she scolded me for wandering off. But on the walk back to the pack territory, I asked her why the woman hummed instead of singing words. My mother said it was because sometimes the most important things can't be put into words. That music speaks to the soul in ways that language never can. Kieran squeezed Iris's hand. "I never forgot that lesson. And when I heard you humming to me in the darkness, when your wordless melody gave me a reason to keep fighting, I understood what my mother meant. You speak to my soul, Iris, not with words, but with something deeper, something that bypasses all the surface things and connects directly to who I really am." Iris felt tears streaming down her face. No one had ever understood. No one had ever looked at her humming as anything but a poor substitute for real speech. But Kieran saw it as something valuable, something special, something uniquely hers. She wrote with shaking hands, "I was so lonely, for so long. I thought I would always be alone." "You never have to be alone again," Kieran said. "Not if you don't want to be. I'm here, Iris. I'm not going anywhere. And if you'll have me, I want to be by your side for the rest of our lives." Iris looked at him, at this alpha heir who had walked into her life wounded and desperate, and who had somehow seen past all her defenses to the person underneath. She thought about the years of isolation, the loneliness that had been her constant companion, the resignation she had felt about her future. And then she thought about the last week, about laughter and conversation, and the feeling of being truly understood for the first time in her life, about Kieran's smile and his patience and the way he looked at her like she was precious. She put down her notebook and did the only thing that felt right. She hummed. It started as a simple melody, something soft and uncertain. But as Kieran's face lit up with understanding, as he squeezed her hand in encouragement, the melody grew stronger. It swelled and soared, becoming something beautiful and complex, expressing all the things she had no words for: fear and hope and affection and wonder and the tentative, fragile beginning of love. When she finished, Kieran was smiling through tears of his own. "Is that a yes?" Iris nodded and wrote, "Yes, I want to try. I want to see where this goes." "Thank you," Kieran breathed. "You won't regret it. I promise." He pulled her into a gentle embrace, careful of the space between them, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wanted. But Iris didn't pull away. She leaned into him, into his warmth and strength, and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth hoping for after all. That night, after Kieran had reluctantly returned to the pack territory, Iris stood at her window and looked out at the forest. Somewhere out there was a pack she had left behind, a community that had never understood her. But also, out there was Kieran, who understood her better than anyone ever had. She pressed her hand against the cold glass and hummed softly, a melody of possibility and hope. The sound drifted out into the darkness, carrying with it all the dreams she had stopped allowing herself to have. And in the distance, if she listened very carefully, she could hear an answering howl. Kieran's voice, in wolf form, acknowledging her song, promising to return. For the first time in years, Iris went to bed with a smile on her face and warmth in her heart. She wasn't alone anymore. She had found someone who heard her voice even in silence. And tomorrow, he would come back. And the day after that, and the day after that. She had found her place in the world. She had found her mate. And it had all started with humming to a wounded wolf through the long winter night. The weeks that followed were the happiest Iris had ever known. Kieran visited every day, arriving in the morning with the sunrise, and staying until evening shadows stretched long across the snow. The hours passed in a blur of conversation and companionship, each day revealing new facets of each other's personalities, new reasons to smile, new moments of connection that made Iris's heart feel too large for her chest. They developed their own rhythm, their own language that went beyond her written words and his spoken ones. Iris learned to read the subtle shifts in Kieran's expression that indicated he was worried or amused or deep in thought. Kieran learned to interpret her gestures and the tilt of her head, to understand what she meant from the way she moved her hands or the melody of her humming. Kieran brought her gifts from the pack territory, fresh meat from successful hunts that he wrapped carefully to keep cold during the journey, soft furs for her bed that had been tanned with skill and care, books he thought she might enjoy with stories of adventure and romance and distant lands. He helped her chop firewood, insisting that her small Omega frame shouldn't have to manage the large logs alone, and he cleared snow from her roof to prevent cave-ins, work that would have taken her days, but that he accomplished in hours with his alpha strength. And he talked to her, really talked, not the superficial pleasantries that most people offered, but deep conversations about philosophy and dreams and fears. He shared stories from his childhood, about growing up with the weight of future leadership on his shoulders, about the pressure to be perfect, about the loneliness of being alpha heir. He talked about his mother, whose death had shaped so much of who he was, about his relationship with his father, about his hopes for what kind of leader he would become. But it was the small moments that Iris treasured most, the moments that felt like magic. The way Kieran would stop mid-sentence when she began to hum, closing his eyes to listen as if her wordless melodies were the most beautiful music ever created. The way he learned to read her expressions and gestures so well that sometimes she didn't need to write anything at all. The way he touched her, gentle and respectful, always asking permission with his eyes before taking her hand or brushing a strand of hair from her face. One evening, about a month after their first meeting, Kieran arrived with his father. Iris's heart sank when she saw Cassius standing behind Kieran on her porch. The alpha had been kind enough when they first met, but he was still intimidating, still powerful, still the leader of a pack that had never wanted her. What if he had come to tell Kieran to stop visiting? What if he disapproved of his heir spending time with a mute Omega? "Peace, Iris," Cassius said, apparently reading the fear in her expression. "I haven't come to cause trouble. I've come to talk." Iris let them both inside, her hands trembling as she reached for her notebook. She wrote, "What can I do for you, Alpha?" "You can stop calling me Alpha. For one thing," Cassius said, settling onto the bench by her fire, "if my son has claimed you as his mate, as he insists he has, then you are pack now. You may call me Cassius." Iris stared at the words she had just written, then slowly looked up at Kieran, who was smiling nervously. "I told him," Kieran said, "about us, about the mate bond, about wanting to build a life with you." "And what did he say?" Iris wrote, afraid of the answer. "He said it was about time I found someone who could keep me humble," Kieran replied with a laugh, "and he wanted to meet with you properly to discuss what comes next." Cassius leaned forward, his amber eyes serious but not unkind. "My son tells me you wish to remain in this cabin, that you're not ready to move to the Pack territory. Is that true?" Iris nodded and wrote, "This is my home. I've built a life here. I'm not ready to give it up." "I understand, and I respect that." Cassius paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I need you to understand something about our world, about what it means to be the mate of an alpha heir. Kieran will someday be the leader of our pack. His mate will be expected to take on certain responsibilities, to fulfill certain roles. Can you do that without a voice?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. It was the same doubt Iris had been carrying in her heart, the same fear that woke her in the night. How could she be a proper mate to an alpha when she couldn't speak? How could she attend pack meetings or mediate disputes or do any of the things an alpha's mate was supposed to do? She wrote slowly, "I don't know. I've never tried, but I want to learn." "That's all I needed to hear," Cassius said, and his stern expression softened slightly. "My son believes in you, Iris. He thinks you have strength and wisdom that go beyond the ability to speak. I trust his judgment, so here's what I propose." He stood and began to pace, clearly thinking through his words. "You remain here in your cabin for now, building your relationship with Kieran without the pressure of pack politics, but you also begin to visit the territory, to meet the pack members, to learn what will be expected of you. We have 6 months until Kieran's coronation as alpha heir, when he will officially be recognized as my successor. If, by that time, you feel ready to take on the role of his mate. Publicly, we will hold a mating ceremony. If not, we revisit the discussion." Iris looked at Kieran, who was watching her with hope and fear in equal measure. 6 months. That was generous, more time than she had any right to expect. But it was also terrifying, the thought of presenting herself to the pack as Kieran's chosen mate. She wrote, "What if they don't accept me? What if they think I'm not worthy? Then they'll answer to me," Cassius said, his voice hard with alpha authority. "You saved my son's life, Iris. That alone earns you respect. Anyone who treats you with anything less will find themselves facing my displeasure. And trust me, they don't want that." Kieran knelt beside her chair, taking her hand in his. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to. If the pressure is too much, if you'd rather stay here in your cabin and live quietly, I'll support that choice. I'll visit you, be with you, love you regardless of whether you ever set foot in the pack territory." Love. He had said love. Iris's heart stuttered at the word, at the sincerity in his eyes. She wrote, "You love me?" "From the moment I heard you humming in the darkness," Kieran said without hesitation. "From the moment you chose to save a dying wolf instead of protecting yourself. From every conversation we've had and every silence we've shared. Yes, Iris, I love you." Iris felt tears streaming down her face. She had never thought anyone would love her, had resigned herself to a life alone. And now this man, this alpha heir, was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. She set down her notebook and did the only thing she could. She hummed a melody of love and joy and hope, letting the music express everything she felt but couldn't say. And when she finished, she leaned forward and kissed him, gentle and tentative, her first kiss, a promise without words. Kieran made a sound low in his throat, somewhere between a laugh and a sob, and kissed her back with a tenderness that made her heart soar. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Cassius was smiling from his spot by the fire. "I'll take that as a yes, then," the alpha said. 6 months, Iris. We'll take this slow, let you adjust at your own pace, but know that you are welcome in our pack, and anyone who says otherwise will answer to me." The following months were a whirlwind of new experiences. Kieran began taking Iris to the pack territory for short visits, carefully planned to avoid overwhelming her, introducing her to key members one at a time or in small groups, helping her navigate the complex social dynamics that governed pack life. It was overwhelming at first, being surrounded by so many shifters, all of them talking and laughing and communicating with an ease she would never possess. The noise of so many voices, the constant movement, the unspoken social rules she had never learned, all of it pressed against her senses like a physical weight. But slowly, carefully, with Kieran's patient guidance, Iris began to find her place. She discovered that many pack members had heard about how she saved Kieran's life, and they treated her with respect because of it, nodding to her in the streets, stepping aside to let her pass, offering small gestures of welcome that made her feel seen. She met Omegas who were curious about her weaving, asking questions about her techniques and materials, genuinely interested in her craft. She encountered Alphas who appreciated her herbal knowledge, requesting remedies for ailments, seeking her advice on healing matters. And she interacted with children who didn't care that she couldn't speak and just enjoyed playing games that didn't require talking, charades and hide-and-seek and elaborate scenarios involving toy wolves that made her smile. One particularly memorable afternoon, a group of young pups had approached her nervously, clearly having been dared by their friends. The boldest, a girl of perhaps 6 with bright blue eyes, had signed a careful greeting, one of the few signs Iris recognized. When Iris's face lit up and she signed back, the children had erupted in excited yips and howls. Turns out the girl's grandmother had been teaching them sign language, insisting it was a valuable skill, and they were thrilled to finally have someone to practice with. After that day, Iris had a small following of pups who sought her out whenever she visited, eager to practice signing, to show off what they'd learned, to bridge the gap between their world and hers. It was a small thing, but it meant everything: acceptance from the next generation, proof that her way of communicating didn't have to be a barrier. And she met Kieran's circle, the friends and allies who would someday help him lead the pack. They were good people, welcoming and kind, who learned to read her written words and who never made her feel like a burden. One afternoon, about 3 months into her visits, Iris met Lydia, the pack's head healer. The older woman took one look at Iris's notebook and smiled. "My grandmother was deaf," Lydia said. "She taught me that there are many ways to communicate, and speech is only one of them. She was one of the finest healers the pack ever had." Iris wrote, she couldn't speak, but she had hands that could gentle the wildest wolf and a presence that made everyone feel safe. "She taught me that healing isn't about what you say, it's about what you do." Lydia patted Iris's hand. "I see the same gift in you, the way Kieran talks about you, the way you saved his life with nothing but herbs and determination. That's real healing power." Iris felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of anxiety she had been carrying. If a deaf healer could earn respect, if disability wasn't automatically disqualifying, then maybe she could do this after all. She began spending time with Lydia, learning advanced healing techniques, helping in the pack's medical hall. She discovered she had a talent for reading pain in people's faces, for sensing what they needed before they could articulate it. Her humming, which she had always thought of as just comfort for herself, turned out to soothe patients in ways that words couldn't. "You have a gift," Lydia told her after watching Iris calm a frightened child with nothing but a gentle melody, "not despite your silence, but because of it. You've learned to communicate in ways the rest of us never had to develop." As the months passed, Iris grew more confident in the pack territory. She began to see herself not as a broken omega trying to fit into a world that didn't want her, but as someone with unique skills and perspectives to offer. Her weaving became popular, not just for its beauty, but for the stories she could tell through images when words failed her. One tapestry depicted the night she saved Kieran, showing a small omega kneeling beside a massive wolf, her hands glowing with healing light, a piece that became a treasured symbol of their love story. Her healing work was valued not despite her methods, but because of them. She had learned to read pain in people's faces, to sense what they needed before they could articulate it, to provide comfort through presence rather than platitudes. Her humming, which she had always thought of as just comfort for herself, turned out to soothe patients in ways that words couldn't, calming frightened children and easing dying elders in their final moments. She developed a reputation as someone who could be trusted with secrets, with fears, with the vulnerable truths that people couldn't speak aloud, because she couldn't repeat what she heard, because she communicated through writing that could be destroyed or signing that left no permanent record. Pack members began seeking her out for confidential conversations. She became a mediator, a counselor, a safe harbor for those struggling with problems they couldn't share openly. One day, about 4 months into her integration with the pack, a young Omega woman came to her in tears. Her name was Sarah, and she had been mate bonded to an alpha who was treating her poorly. Not abusive enough to warrant intervention, but cold and dismissive in ways that left her feeling worthless. Sarah couldn't speak to anyone else about it. The alpha was popular, well-liked, and challenging him would have made her an outcast. But she could tell Iris, could pour out her heart to someone who would listen without judgment, who wouldn't spread rumors, who would simply be there. Iris wrote carefully, "You deserve better. You deserve respect and kindness and love." "But I'm just an omega," Sarah said, echoing the same thoughts Iris had harbored about herself for so many years. "I should be grateful he chose me at all." "No," Iris wrote firmly. "Being omega doesn't mean settling for cruelty. You have worth. You have value. Don't let anyone make you feel less." The conversation lasted hours. Iris, writing pages of reassurance and advice, Sarah crying, and eventually finding the strength to confront her situation. Within a week, with Iris's support and Kieran's backing, Sarah had ended the toxic mate bond and begun the healing process. Word spread after that. Other pack members, mostly omegas, but some betas, and even a few alphas, began seeking Iris out for guidance. She became known as someone who saw clearly, who didn't judge, who helped people find their own strength. Her silence, once seen as a weakness, became her greatest asset. People trusted her with their truths because they knew she couldn't betray them. Kieran watched this transformation with pride and love, seeing his mate step into a role uniquely suited to her gifts. "You're exactly what this pack needed," he told her one evening. "Someone who listens more than they speak, someone who sees worth in everyone, someone who proves that strength comes in many forms." But even as Iris found confidence and purpose in her new life, she still struggled with moments of doubt. There were days when the weight of her role felt crushing, when she wondered if she was fooling everyone, when the old insecurities rose up like ghosts to haunt her. On those days, Kieran would take her hand, and they would walk to a quiet spot in the forest. He would hold her while she cried silent tears, would wait patiently while she processed her fears. And then he would remind her of everything she had accomplished, every life she had touched, every person she had helped, every barrier she had overcome. "You're not perfect," he would say. "No one is, but you're perfect for me and perfect for this pack. Don't let the doubts win, Iris. You've come too far to give up now." And she would hum her gratitude, her love, her renewed determination, and together they would return to face whatever challenges awaited them. They spent every possible moment together, learning each other's rhythms and quirks, building a foundation of trust and affection and love that grew stronger every day. Kieran showed her the territory from end to end, the forests and streams and mountains that would someday be partially under her care as his mate. He taught her about pack politics and history, preparing her for the role she would take on. But he also showed her his favorite childhood spots, the tree he used to climb, the meadow where he first shifted, the cave where he went when he needed to think. And Iris shared herself with him in return. She showed him her loom, taught him the basics of weaving, laughed silently when his large alpha hands fumbled with the delicate threads. She took him foraging, showing him which plants were medicinal and which were poisonous, sharing the knowledge her mother had passed down. She hummed for him every evening, creating new melodies that expressed the growing depth of her feelings. 5 months after that first meeting, on a clear spring evening, Kieran took Iris to the top of a mountain that overlooked both the pack territory and her distant cabin. They sat together, watching the sunset, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "The coronation is in a month," Kieran said quietly, "and I need to know what you want, Iris. We can have a public mating ceremony, make our bond official in front of the pack, or we can keep things private, you can remain in your cabin, and we continue as we are. I'll support whatever you choose." Iris had been thinking about this moment for weeks, weighing her fears against her hopes, her past against her future. She pulled out her notebook and wrote, "I'm afraid. What if I fail you? What if I can't be the maiden Alpha needs?" "You couldn't fail me if you tried," Kieran said fiercely. "You've already proven yourself 1,000 times over. The pack respects you, my father admires you, and I love you more than I have words to express. You are exactly the mate I need, Iris. Exactly." She wrote, "I want the ceremony. I want to be yours publicly. I want to take my place by your side." "Are you sure?" Kieran's voice was tight with emotion. "You don't have to do this for me. I don't need a public ceremony to know you're mine." "I'm sure," Iris wrote. "I'm done hiding. I'm done letting fear control my life. I love you, Kieran, and I want everyone to know it." Kieran pulled her into a kiss that stole her breath, passionate and tender and full of promise. When they finally parted, he was grinning through tears of joy. "Then we'll have the most beautiful mating ceremony this pack has ever seen," he promised, "and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that choosing me was the best decision you ever made." The mating ceremony took place on a perfect summer evening, held in the sacred grove at the heart of the territory. The grove was ancient, its towering trees hundreds of years old, their branches forming a natural cathedral overhead. Fireflies danced through the gathering darkness, and the air smelled of pine and wildflowers and the sweet scent of the ceremonial candles that had been lit around the clearing. The entire pack had gathered to witness their alpha heir claim his mate, to welcome Iris officially into their family. They sat in concentric circles around the center of the grove, the highest-ranking members closest to where the ceremony would take place, the rest arranged by traditional hierarchies. But there was no hostility in their faces, no judgment or dismissal, only curiosity and, in many cases, genuine happiness for their future alpha. Iris wore a dress she had woven herself over the course of 3 months, working on it in secret during the hours when Kieran was occupied with pack business. It was deep blue, like a twilight sky, with silver threads that caught the fading light, creating the illusion of stars against the darkness. The fabric was soft against her skin, flowing when she moved, a physical manifestation of the beauty she could create even without words. Her hands shook as Kieran led her to the center of the grove, every eye on them, the weight of their attention almost overwhelming. But his grip was steady, his presence a constant reassurance, and when she looked up at him, she saw nothing but love and pride in his amber eyes. The ceremony was traditional, full of ancient words and symbolic gestures that had been passed down through generations of shifters. Cassius presided, his alpha authority giving weight to every word, his expression solemn but not unkind. He spoke of mate bonds and eternal commitments, of two souls becoming one, of the responsibilities and joys that came with such a union. But when it came time for the vows, Cassius paused and looked at Iris with understanding. "Our new tradition," he announced to the pack, "will be that Iris speaks in her own language, and we will listen." Iris felt her throat tighten with emotion. She looked at Kieran, who nodded encouragingly, and then she began to hum. The melody started soft and uncertain, but as the pack fell silent to listen, as Kieran's eyes filled with love and pride, it grew stronger. She hummed of her journey from loneliness to belonging, from isolation to acceptance, from fear to love. She hummed of long winter nights and gentle healing, of 30 wolves circling a cabin and an alpha heir who saw her worth. She hummed of hope and home and forever. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the grove. Even Cassius looked moved, his stern features softened by emotion. "I think," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered pack, "that was the most beautiful set of vows I've ever heard." The pack howled their agreement, a chorus of voices raised in celebration and welcome. And when Kieran kissed his mate for the first time officially, marking her as his before the entire pack, Iris knew she had finally found her place in the world. The years that followed were full and happy. Iris divided her time between her cabin, which she couldn't quite bring herself to abandon completely, and the pack territory, where she established herself as a valued healer and advisor. The cabin became a retreat, a place she and Kieran would escape to when they needed privacy or quiet, when the demands of leadership became too much and they needed to remember who they were beneath the titles. She continued her weaving, her work becoming famous even in human territories, as word spread of the mute Omega who could create tapestries of breathtaking beauty. Merchants came from distant cities to purchase her pieces, paying prices that astonished her, and she used the income to fund medical supplies for the pack's healing hall, ensuring that no one would ever lack treatment because of cost. Her healing work expanded as well. She worked alongside Lydia for years, learning advanced techniques, developing her own approaches that combined traditional shifter medicine with the herbal knowledge passed down from her mother. Patients began requesting her, specifically, not despite her silence, but because of it. There was something calming about being treated by someone who didn't fill the air with unnecessary chatter, who listened more than they spoke, who created an environment of peace that facilitated healing. When Kieran officially became Alpha at age 28, with Iris at his side as his mate and partner, the transition was smooth. The pack had already accepted her, already learned that leadership didn't require a voice when you had wisdom and compassion and strength of character. They had seen how she mediated disputes by listening to all sides without bias, how she advocated for the vulnerable, how she made their alpha heir a better leader by providing perspective he would never have had without her. Children came, eventually, after 3 years of trying and worrying and hoping. 3 of them over the course of a decade, 2 boys and a girl, all with their father's amber eyes and their mother's gentle spirit. They grew up bilingual in ways that went beyond language, speaking aloud to their pack and signing with their mother, comfortable in both worlds, equally fluent in words and silence. The eldest, Marcus, learned to translate his mother's humming into words for pack meetings, becoming her voice when written notes weren't sufficient. The middle child, Thea, inherited her mother's weaving talent and would sit for hours beside Iris at the loom, the 2 of them working in companionable silence. The youngest, Kieran Jr., developed his own unique melody that he hummed in harmony with his mother, creating songs without words that brought joy to everyone who heard them. They grew up proud of their mother, never ashamed of her silence, never wishing she was different. They were fierce defenders against anyone who dared to suggest she was less than because she couldn't speak, more than willing to get into fights that would later earn them scoldings from both parents. And they learned from her that disability was not weakness, that different didn't mean deficient, that there were many ways to be strong and valuable and loved. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep and pack business was concluded, Kieran and Iris would sit together, and she would hum the melody that had saved his life that long ago winter night, and Kieran would close his eyes and listen, marveling once again at the gift fate had given him when it brought a wounded wolf to a mute Omega's door. 20 years after that first meeting, Iris stood at the window of the home she shared with Kieran in the pack territory, watching their children play in the yard below. Her cabin still stood at the edge of the territory, maintained but mostly empty now, a reminder of where she had started and how far she had come. Sometimes they went there for weekends, teaching the children about self-sufficiency and solitude, about the value of quiet spaces in a loud world. The view from this window showed her everything she had gained. Marcus teaching Kieran Jr. how to fight in wolf form, their bodies a blur of fur and playful growls. Thea sitting beneath a tree with a group of young Omegas, likely sharing stories or advice the way Iris had with so many over the years. Pack members moved through the streets below, going about their daily lives, comfortable and safe and protected by the leadership of their alpha and his mate. It still amazed her sometimes. This life she was living, there were days when she woke up and couldn't quite believe it was real, that she really was the mate of an alpha, the mother of 3 healthy pups, a respected healer and advisor. Days when the old insecurities whispered that she didn't deserve this happiness, that someday everyone would realize she was just a broken Omega, pretending to be more than she was. But then Kieran would kiss her awake, or the children would pile onto her bed, demanding breakfast, or a pack member would stop her in the street to thank her for her help, and the whispers would fade. This was her life. She had earned it, built it, fought for it, and she was going to enjoy every moment. Kieran came up behind her now, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder, a position that had become their private tradition over the years. She leaned back against him, fitting perfectly into his embrace, her body knowing his as well as she knew her own. "Happy?" he murmured against her ear. Iris hummed her response, a melody of contentment and love and gratitude. No words were needed. They never had been. "I love you," Kieran said, as he did every day. "My brave, beautiful, perfect mate." Iris turned in his arms and kissed him, then pulled out the small notebook she still carried everywhere. She wrote, "I love you too. Always." "Always," Kieran agreed, pulling her close. "Always and forever." Outside, their children were howling playfully, racing through the yard in wolf form, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Inside, the pack's healer and her alpha mate stood in comfortable silence, their bond as strong as the day it had formed, their love growing deeper with every passing year. And if sometimes, late at night, Iris would hum the melody that had started everything, Kieran would hold her close and remember the miracle of a mute Omega who had saved a dying wolf with nothing but herbs and a wordless song. She had given him life. He had given her belonging. Together, they had built a family, a legacy, and a love that would endure for generations. All because she had hummed to a wounded wolf through a long winter night. All because 30 wolves had recognized the truth that her pack had been blind to. that worth isn't measured in words spoken, but in actions taken and love given. All because sometimes the most important things can't be put into words, and the most beautiful music is the kind that speaks directly to the soul. Iris had found her voice, even without speaking, and in doing so, she had found everything else she had ever wanted: home, family, love, purpose, forever.